Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be making a mask out of cardboard and found objects to demonstrate the element of art texture. So here are a couple of examples. The first one is the one we're going to be doing today, and then the other two are from previous years. So let's get started. First, we want to build a base. So we want our mask to not be super flat. So we want to make a curved base or a base with some shape to it. So here's my design sketch here. It's actually not going to end up looking a whole lot like that. I'm kind of bending this cardboard in order to get a little bit of a concave shape so that it's a little more rounded, not a flat base. All right, so I'm just kind of folding this and bending it. I bent it over the edge of my drawing board. If you can find a corner to kind of flex it over, that tends to make it a little easier to bend. Then this piece is going to brace it on the back to make it hold that shape. You can also separate the top layer of the cardboard to expose the corrugation. That's a really good way to get some texture into your mask. But what that will also do is make the cardboard more flexible. It can be super stiff with all the layers on it, but once you remove one of the layers, it gets much more flexible. So you might want to do that while you're constructing your base. All right, so I'm kind of trimming this into shape, getting it all set up. Now we're going to add facial features. Okay, so it might be a good idea to make your facial features out of something a little bit lighter if you need to be more flexible. I'm going to use a combination of cardboard and chipboard, which we'll show you later. But here's the cardboard. I'm going to make some teeth here, and I'm going to make a lower jaw. That first shape was the lower jaw, and then these teeth are going to be glued to the back, and the whole thing will be glued to the mask. You make whatever facial features you want. You don't have to do the same ones as me, obviously. Get creative with it. Choose what you want to kind of emphasize to include, but we want to give the mask a little bit of shape overall. All right, so I've got some cardboard scissors or cardboard shears with the blue handle there. Those work pretty well, but I'm using a box cutter because some of these small cuts going into the cracks and crevices can get a little bit tricky with the scissors. Well, we just kind of slowly cut away the extra bits of cardboard until we get the shape we want. So then I'm going to hot glue this to the back of the lower jaw there and glue that whole thing to the face. For gluing the facial features onto the face, you can either use a hot glue or a craft glue, like an Elmer's or a tacky glue. The hot glue tends to make a pretty bad bond, but it dries more quickly. So if you don't want to hold things for a long time, sometimes it's a good choice to use. The craft glue gets a really nice bond with the cardboard, generally speaking, and it's also suitable for gluing on objects. So that's a good choice, but either of them should be all right. I'm cutting some little slits to help curve this a little bit. I don't know how well that worked, but I'm trying to get a little more shape into the mask. You can also use tape if it's going to be in a hidden area, or if you want to use the tape as part of your texture, that could work. And yeah, just trying to get a little angle there so that the bottom jaw pokes out from the mask a little bit. There's a little bit of an underbite. Now I will hold it for a long time. If you can find something to clamp these so you don't have to hold it the whole time, it certainly makes life a lot more bearable, and you can work on other things while it's drying. That tends to be a smarter way of working. All right, so here we have the mask base with the lower jaw glued on, and now we're going to add a nose. So I'm just kind of measuring with a ruler, trying to figure out how big I want my nose to be, and then I'm going to draw it out. So I'm going to draw out the front of it to size, and then I'm going to make some flaps. These flaps will be, or tabs, for gluing down. These triangles are going to be the side of the nose here. I'm going to add some flaps at the bottom, and then I'm going to add a bottom of the nose there. So when I fold this into shape, it should make a little kind of nose shape. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. I'm using my cardboard shears for this. They work really well. They're heavy enough to cut through the cardboard a little better than regular scissors. But on this chipboard, they make quick work. The chipboard I'm using is actually a cereal box. So chipboard is like the kind of thing that you see in a cereal box or like a cracker box or a cat food box. It's that thinner sort of cardboardy stuff, but it doesn't have the corrugation. And that would work really nicely probably for most of your facial features. It's a little easier to fold, a little easier to cut. I think it's generally going to treat you better than the cardboard for anything that requires a lot of detail. I think cardboard's really good for the base, but the chipboard can be really nice for making the facial features. So I use that for the nose because the nose is a little more complex than the rest of the features I'm including. So I'll do some cardboard for the lower jaw like you saw, and I'm also going to do a little bit for the brow. But I think the chipboard is a really good choice. We'll finish up our facial features by adding a brow up at the top and kind of end up looking a little bit like this. I'm going to go ahead and glue that on. I'm not going to show me cutting it out because I think you can figure that out. I think I maybe even just used a scrap piece of cardboard. I can't remember if I cut this out specifically for this or just kind of found it, but it'll make a suitable eyebrow. I'm going to wait to do the eyes until later because I've got some plans for those. But you can build up as much now as you would like. All right, so next we're going to be adding color and texture. So you've got some options here. You could paint this for one option. You can also collage things onto it. I'm going to be doing a little paper mache, a little bit of collage as well. So I've got my paper mache juice here. This is 1/3 Elmer's glue and 2/3 water. And I'm ripping up some tissue paper strips. The tissue paper will give you a nice kind of texture and surface to it, especially if you layer different colors. You can get really nice kind of texture to it. If you want the color to be pure, it's a good idea to start with a layer of white tissue paper, just to get that white base, and then lay the colored texture or tissue paper on top. I'm not going to do it that way because I kind of like the effect that you get. I'm doing kind of an ogre, so I want the skin to be a little bit wonky, kind of modeled, have different colors and textures in it. So I'm just going to do this directly onto the cardboard. But doing a layer of white tissue paper first would be a good idea if you want those colors to stay true. So all I'm going to do is dip my brush in my paper mache liquid here and kind of coat the area I want to cover and then start adding strips on. Actually, I found working this that it's a little bit easier to tear up like little postage stamp size squares, maybe a little bigger than a postage stamp, but little squares and stick them on rather than trying to do it with whole long strips. It just makes it a little easier to get into the recesses and nooks and crannies and control where you're putting the paper down. So I started off with these long strips. I don't think that's the best solution. But if you're covering a lot of area, hey, feel free to go that way. But the tiny squares, I think, work a little bit better. So you want to lay a little bit of it down to start, and then you can go over with the top coat. That should lock everything in place and lock all the layers together as you start. All right, so in order to push the texture and to try to get like a 5 o'clock shadow sort of look on the chin, I decided it might be a fun idea to try to do an underlayer of newspaper underneath. Kind of look like that stubble, that 5 o'clock shadow, I think. And then I'm going to layer a layer of my blue tissue paper on top of that. All right, I want to also get a little bit of color variation in the skin. So I'm going to do kind of a pink color for the nose and put a little bit of pink in the cheeks. You can see I'm not getting very good blue tissue coverage up on the upper half, but as I build up the layers, it's going to look a lot better. So you just kind of have to layer it, and you can add different colors into the layer to get a little bit of variation in the color throughout the face, and that can create really cool effects. The paper mache is also nice because it gives you nice texture, whereas you have to work a little bit more with the paint to get that. So yeah, I'm just kind of adding some pink into the nose and the cheeks, and I'll also continue building up my layers of blue. All right, so I've built up my blue a little bit, and now I want to collage in this eye. So I'm just going to use my paper mache medium for this. I think I'll call it paper mache medium. That sounds way less disgusting than paper mache juice. Paper mache juice sounds absolutely repulsive. Although I do believe it has nutritional content. You probably get calories out of the Elmer's glue water, but that sounds pretty gross. So I'm going to collage this eye on. I just cut it out of a sheet of paper, and then I'm going to add some blue tissue paper up to the edge of the eye to kind of merge it with skin tone that I have around it. All right, now I just continue working my way through, adding layers until I feel like I've built up enough color on the surface of my mask. You can see that as I add layers, my color's getting more complex and interesting. I'm getting really interesting textures starting to happen all over the mask. And that's kind of the real nice thing about the paper mache with the tissue paper. You can get really nice textures and color combinations, especially when you start layering in different colors together. So yeah, you just kind of want to keep building these up until you're happy with it. They are going to lighten a little bit when they dry. It's going to look a little darker when it's wet. It's going to be easier to see the cardboard through. You'll probably have a little less of that if you do a layer of white tissue before you start adding the color in. All right, so now we want things to fully dry. Whether you painted it or paper mache, we want to make sure everything's nice and dry. We're going to focus now on adding texture. So I'm putting a little bit of crackle paste onto the teeth here. This is an acrylic medium that cracks as it dries. The thicker you apply it, the larger the cracks will be. A thinner application will have smaller cracks and more of them. So I'm doing a fairly thick application here, and I'm just painting it onto the teeth. I'll follow that up by painting the gums. And once this dries, in my next session, I'll do a little wash of brown. And that's going to settle into the cracks and kind of emphasize them a little bit more so they're a little more visible. It's just going to be a wash of brown. So I'm going to mix a brown and then thin it out with water and then paint that on top. So we'll talk about that a little more later. But I'm just trying to get a nice thick, but not too thick, coat of the crackle medium on. Next, I'm going to add some craft foam circles. I'm punching these out with a little hole puncher. Now I'm gluing them on with some craft glue. You use an Elmer's or a tacky glue for this. You could also just use the glue itself to apply texture if you want, or you can even use hot glue and do little beads of hot glue to add texture as well. I'm going to follow that up with a little bit of puff paint. This puff paint is typically used for fabric, but it has a little bit of a three-dimensional quality. It's thick, so it stands up, and you can use that to make little dots or lines by squeezing it out of the nozzle. So I'm using that to add a little more texture to the skin here. Some more orange bumpies. Trying to add lots of them so we have examples of both simulated and actual texture. So these puff paint lumps and the little punch outs are going to be actual texture. The eye would be simulated texture, as well as the newspaper 5 o'clock shadow. I'm also going to paint in the gums real quick. So I'm just using a little bit of red acrylic paint for that. I'm just going to paint along the gum line here, being careful not to get any onto the teeth. All right, there we go. Just kind of finishing that up. I got a little on the lip. You want to be careful. It's good to have like a wet paper towel around when you're painting, just in case. All right, so there we go. All right, so now this guy is looking really exceptionally beautiful. Next, I'm going to add some three-dimensional elements to it. All right, so I thought in order to show as many techniques as possible with this, it'd be a good idea to sculpt an eye and a horn. So I'm using an air-dry clay, and I'm doing a little trick that I recently learned. If you add a little bit of Elmer's glue to the air-dry clay, it makes it a little stronger and a little more stable. The air-dry clay can have some issues with cracking as it dries, and it can also be a little bit fragile after it's done drying. So I'm hoping that this will add a little bit of strength to it. And so far, it seems like this has been a good move. The mask is holding up pretty well, and everything seems sturdy on it. So you can just use the air-dry clay if you want, or you can try adding a little bit of glue to it and see how that treats you. So I'm just kind of flattened it out like a pancake, and I poured some glue over it like syrup, and then I squished it together into a ball and mashed it all up to distribute the syrup evenly. Just like when you're eating a pancake, you just got to put the syrup on there, mash it all into a ball, and then you've got a little gulab jamun, and you're ready to rock. So I'm going to take my air-dry clay here, and I'm going to sculpt it into a horn shape. Since I put the glue in, this is pretty sticky. You may want to let it sit for a little while or clean your hands off. If it's too sticky, if you let it just dry out a little bit, it'll correct itself pretty quickly. But yeah, the air dry clay is really good for sculpting pieces where you require something very specific. It's a little easier to control than just found object stuff. Another really good alternative for making eyeballs is to use ping pong balls. You can either use them whole or slice them in half. They make really fun eyes depending on like what kind of mask you're trying to do. All right. So if you make anything out of air dry clay, you should let it dry overnight before you try to glue it on. So make sure you have enough time to get that all done. So I'm adding a little bit of a brown wash to my teeth here to make those cracks a little more obvious. So the crackle paste needs to dry overnight, just like the air dry clay. But now it's dry and cracked, and adding a little wash, a dark wash, will really bring out those cracks. Now it's just a matter of kind of gluing on my eyeball and my horn, and then I will paint those up. You may decide that it's better to paint your sculpted objects before you stick them on. Either way should be fine. It's just a little trickier to paint sometimes when they're on. All right, so here I am finishing up the painting here. So I didn't include all of the painting. I've also glued on a little bit of faux fur around the horn there, and I made some eyebrows that I also added. So there we go. Here's our finished mask, and we're all finished. So we've got examples of simulated and actual texture. It's a fun mask overall. It's got a nice 3D shape to it, a nice form, and it engages differently from different angles. So that meets most of our sculptural checks as well. So there you go. Sculpting things out of found objects is a lot of fun because you can get really creative. You can take things and make them into something new. And I think it's, one of our earliest artistic impulses is making things out of things we find. So I hope that this has been helpful to you and informative. And we'll see you next time. Thank you and goodbye.